Good morning, Magic. I'm Gavin Verhey from Wizards of the Coast, and returning in Double Masters are the 3 Urzatron lands. The Urzatron first appeared in 1994 in Antiquities. Now, Antiquities was a set all about artifacts. In fact, every card in the set had the word artifact somewhere on it, either in the rules text or being an artifact itself, with 4 exceptions. Strip Mine, and the 3 Urzatron pieces, which of course all made colorless mana that could cast artifacts, so it kind of makes sense. And I say 3 Urza's lands, but it was really more like 12 Urza's lands, because each one had 4 different versions you could collect. Back then, the thing that was being tried was that a card would have multiple versions of it in the same set, different arts. Now for reference, when Antiquities came out, Standard didn't even exist. Standard, or what would be called Type 2 before eventually becoming Standard, didn't come out until January of 1995. But they aren't gone for long though, as there's a continuous run of them showing up in Chronicles and following through into 5th edition. So 5th edition releases in 1997, and yes, Standard exists then, so you're probably thinking, alright, these had a big impact on Standard. Well, not quite as much. Back then, Standard was a little different animal. Just a few decks that were popular were things like Oath, or decks built around Traded Wind Rider, and of course Necropotence and Tolarian Academy decks. There was even an LD deck people were playing, which is horrible for Tron. So flash forward to 8th edition. Tron hadn't really done a ton up until this point, so it's gotta be safe to bring back, right? No problem. Now, why was it in 8th edition? Well, because the original Mirrodin set was around the corner, and just like Antiquities drew it up, you could make all that mana from your Urza's lands to cast huge artifacts, and this proved to be very powerful. It started off in a mono white deck, pretty innocently. You would do things like Weathered Wayfarer up your Tron pieces and use those to fuel a huge Decree of Justice. Pretty cool. A couple cards quickly rose to the top as things to do with all this mana. One was Mindslaver. This card showed up everywhere and was a pretty great thing to do once you had 10 mana available to you, or even just do it on 2 separate turns with your Urzatron. But a second one, and a big one, was Tooth and Nail. You could get a lot of mana very, very quickly to cast an Entwined Tooth and Nail, which would almost certainly spell out the game. And now when I say spell out the game, it wasn't quite as instant kill as it is these days. You would find things like Lina Nabunas and Platinum Angel to hopefully lock your opponent out from being able to kill you. Or maybe you would find Mephedros Vampire and Triskelion to kill off all your opponent's creatures and lock them down under it. But of course, it wasn't all just ramp decks. There were some control decks with a bit of a combo finish in there too. Mono Blue Tron relied on Mindslaver plus Arcbound Reclaimer, which could then lock you under a Skeleton Shard by Mindslavering you for the rest of the game. But if that didn't quite come together, getting 3 Mindslaver activations off an Arcbound Reclaimer was usually good enough. Now those decks might all sound pretty good, but you have to keep in mind this is all happening during Mirrodin block, perhaps the most broken block in all of modern Magic. So Tron has to contend with things like Ravager Affinity and Skull Clamp, which is no easy feat. And it turns out Tron isn't even the best deck to cast Tooth and Nail in. That's a different deck entirely. And then all the bannings happened and Kamigawa came out, and Tooth and Nail got a few new toys. You could start playing it, for example, with Kiki Jiki, which let you copy Darksteel Colossus to attack for 11 right away, or a Sundering Titan just to kill off all your opponent's lands. But I would say perhaps the golden era of Tron for me is after Ravnica City of Guilds block came out. Mirrodin rotated out, and you had a whole new breed of Tron decks, the blue Tron decks. These decks revolved around Wildfire, and you would get a bunch of your Urzatron lands in play some artifact mana acceleration like the Signets, and then you would cast Wildfire. You'd keep your Tron lands plus your Signets, so you could have all the mana that you needed, and then you would cast threats like Maloku the Clouded Mirror, Kega the Tidestar, or, if you're me, Simic Skyswallower. And for a lot of people, this was a very fond time in Standard. I admittedly don't know how well it would have held up under all the tournaments of today, but it was a lot of fun to play, and these decks were a blast. Now, the Wildfire decks weren't the only Tron decks to show up, there were a variety of others. One in particular that's very memorable are the Martyrtron decks. These decks use Proclamation of Rebirth plus Martyr of Sands, and then occasionally you'd sweep the board and it'd be very difficult for your opponent to recover. How would you win? You would skip a bunch of turns with Chrono Savant, believe it or not, so your opponent would have to deck out. Sounds like a lot of fun, right? Now, it's not just Standard that Tron makes waves in. It's becoming big in Extended too. Now, Tron sees a little bit of Extended play here and there, but that all changes when Time Spiral comes out, and with it, Academy Ruins. This card plus Mindslaver makes for a lock on your opponent that guarantees that you will win the game. You'll take their turns for the rest of the game, and you will never deck out because you're putting Mindslaver back on top every single turn. And the result is a whole new breed of deck. With very few creatures, you might play a couple Sundering Titans that aims to just lock your opponent under Academy Ruins Mindslaver. It's also the perfect deck to show up and crash the party, as everyone is trying out this new Counterbalance top deck, and well, Tron spells are pretty good at getting around Counterbalance. So it starts off as a blue-white control deck, using Wraths to sweep the board until you could eventually get to your lock, but eventually it morphs into a blue-green deck. that simply tries to get to its Mindslaver Academy Runes combo as quickly as possible, using things like Moment's Peace as a fog just so you can buy time to get to your lock. And yeah, sometimes you would still cast Sundering Titan to blow up all of their dual lands too. Now after its extended run, the next time we really see it is in Modern. Once Cloudpost is banned, well, we need a new form of fast mana, and the Urzatron is it. It starts off as a bunch of control decks, like it's always been, but the world changes forever in 2012, when a new deck shows up on Magic Online. This is a red-green Tron deck, and it wins a PTQ in the hands of Charles Gindy. It uses cards like Ancient Stirrings to find a quick Tron to land a Karn. Sound familiar? And of course we've seen a few variations like the Eldrazi Tron decks, but the core of the modern day Tron deck, simply racing to get Tron to drop Karn, has pretty much stayed unchanged. And that's not even getting into Pauper Tron, which can fuel out Ulamog's Crushers or huge Rolling Thunders, or even put you in some kind of horrible ghostly flicker loop. 5 other fun facts about the Tron lands. The first is that they were in Masters Edition 4, a Magic Online only set that kind of predates the current Master sets. They were in the basic land slot, believe it or not, so you would draft a ton of these and get to power out some pretty wild stuff. And number 2, speaking of Magic Online, there are these alternate arts that currently only exist on Magic Online. Have you ever seen these before? Pretty cool. Going back to paper printings, for number 3, did you ever notice that between 8th and 9th edition, only one of the 3 art pieces changed? Urza's Mind changed from 8th edition to 9th edition. Now I mentioned Academy Runes and Time Spiral, but for number 4, a card that is a bit more directly calling out the Urza's lands is Urza's Factory. It even has the subtype Urza's in there, which the other Urza's lands now have. You can tap all 7 mana from your Urza's lands to make a 2/2 Assembly Worker. It's no Karn, but it can get the job done. And number 5, when we were making Dominaria, we wanted a bunch of really cool reprints in the set. So we did look at the Tron lands as options, but ultimately chose to not include them. They're just a little bit too powerful. So now, as you're opening up these beauties in your Double Masters booster packs, you'll know a little bit more about how they got there. Let me know what you think about this episode in the comments, and I'll talk with you again on Friday. In the meantime, may you always hit your Tron on turn 3. You got this.